Of course they can't afford to be independent if they're giving all their money to England. Now, if we had all our money, then maybe we could be independent.
Welcome to a nation with its very own language, trapped inside England. This is Cornwall. In part 1, I travelled down to the southwestern tip of the UK and met with local people to learn a bit about what it means to be Cornish. Because it turns out there's an entire culture and identity here that is all too often ignored by much of Britain. There's a distinct history, unique food, and even a Cornish language which is critically endangered and spoken fluently by 400 to 500 people. But I also learned that the Cornish are a marginalised community, and the relationship between Cornwall and the rest of England has a pretty checkered history. Even today, there are still significant tensions.
The tensions arise from things like the disparity of wealth. So, like, Cornwall's not an easy place to earn a good salary. You know, it's not an easy place to be a young person trying to find work and trying to find your way in the world. There's a lot of villages where there are some beautiful cottages, absolutely beautiful, where the Cornish people that live here are priced out of the market. The houses are holiday homes. So I could walk through on a winter's day and not see anybody. You know, the shops have shut down, and even in the summer, you know, the homes can be empty for a long time. And so that's where the tensions arise, where you see these beautiful villages, and that there'll always be a council estate, and the council estate will be where the locals live, even the ones that are the fishermen, you know, who have to then travel down to the harbour because they can't afford to live near the harbour, where traditionally the fishing cottages were, because those fishing cottages are now holiday homes.
In some communities it's a huge problem, particularly around the coast. The worst example of a statistic, I would say, is on the north coast. There are some constituencies, some parishes, where 40% of the houses are second homes. Most importantly, it's a problem for the vibrancy and the lifeblood of that community. We've got some lovely second home owners that have houses in our village, but they're no good to me during lockdown to go and deliver prescriptions to people who are locked away inside, who are shielding. So you need an active, energetic community, and what that requires is people to live in that community.
I can recommend here, and it's a good time of year for you to go to Newquay or St Ives or Perranporth. Watch the tumbleweeds go down the streets with all the closed shops.
With the holiday cottages, there's often a misapprehension that, you know, you come and rent a lovely holiday cottage and that rent is going to go back to a local Cornish family that own the cottage. That's absolutely often not the case. And I think some of the lovely tourists we have think they're putting into the Cornish economy. Actually, that money is going out of the Cornish economy and to holiday cottage owners and second home owners that actually live up country. And that's deplorable. And that should have been dealt with by this present government.
With such beautiful scenery and nature, it's not surprising that people travel from far and wide to visit it. But it was easy to imagine locals' frustration, seeing the homes their parents or grandparents grew up in left empty by some wealthy Londoner except for a couple of weeks of the year. I suppose it must feel like your heritage is being treated as a commodity. And not much is being done by the government to address issues that Cornish people have raised, like regulating tourism in second homes, dealing with discrimination, or preserving the language. Despite its history and the recognition of the Cornish as a distinct ethnic minority, Cornwall is still administered as a county, so there's only so much that can be done without government support. And all these tensions have fueled a growing Cornish nationalism movement. But it's probably not the kind of nationalism you're used to. It's not a right or left-wing message, instead it's a push for more powers to be returned to Cornwall, and for the region to have its own parliament. Some even want total independence.
The problem we have is too many decisions about Cornwall are made outside of Cornwall. Not only are we administered as if we're a county of Cornwall, but we're also subsumed into larger units.
They call it Devonwall or something, yeah.
Yeah, Devonwall is a phenomenon that's been going on since the 1980s. And then we've got Bristol as a regional capital. So as well as being administered like an English county, a marginal group is further marginalised in a fake constructed region.
Hypothetically, would you all like an independent Cornwall in an ideal world?
I mean, personally, I'd like us to be independent. Yeah. And we certainly need more autonomy because we give our money to England and we get pennies back. You know, we're in a similar position to Wales and Scotland. People who say Wales is too wee, too small, too poor, but they give all their money to England, who gives them a pittance in return and then says they can't afford to be independent. You know, of course they can't afford to be independent if they're giving all their money to England. We can't be independent if we're giving all our money to England. Now, if we had all our money, then maybe we could be independent.
Your common basis, I think, amongst any people who are at all interested in Cornwall, its language, its history, its culture, its economy, its democracy, and so on. The basic line is we would like to see more power in Cornwall, and then let's see where it goes from there. Let's see us empowered first, and let's see where that journey leads us. We're not extremists, you see. A lot of people take a pride in Cornwall and being a Cornish patriot, I prefer, as being some sort of extremist. Well, I don't feel it as such. You know, I'm proud of my history, heritage. I'm proud of my environment, and I'm proud of the language. You know.
We want a Cornwall where Cornish people are not second-class citizens, where our education is given a Cornish perspective. There is a history of ethnic tension between Cornwall and England, and that gets erased from our education system.
Is then maybe the best and most realistic option, is it maybe a Cornish assembly? Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that something that you could see happening in the next, 10 years or so?
No.
Not at all. A common theme that popped up in my conversations with Cornish people was that a lot of them really don't feel heard. You could argue that that's why populist messages like Brexit resonated so much here. The problem with the Cornish Assembly isn't necessarily that people in Cornwall don't want it, it's that there isn't the will in government to make it happen. But there is one political party hoping to change that, Mebyon Kernow, and Michael is their party development officer and one of their elected councillors.
To me, decisions are always best made locally. The Cornish economy is different from the economy even of Exeter. The policy that we come up for Cornwall needs to be distinct to Cornwall. There's a real crisis of democracy in the United Kingdom. We're an incredibly centralised state, and I think that's one of the reasons why there's real disillusionment with politics. How can you run a politics on with 65, 70, 80 million people? What you need to do is have devolved power where decisions can be taken locally. And I have faith that A, there'll be better decisions, but B, there'll be more accountable decisions.
How do you get it? Is it as simple as just a vote in Parliament?
Okay,
is that it?
So it would be, but I think we'd lose that vote in Parliament, sadly, because we don't have any MPs that are Mebyon Kernow. I think for us, the next big milestone is the Cornwall Council elections. So I'm standing for two of my local parishes to be a parish councillor, but also a Cornwall councillor. And Mebyon Kernow needs a breakthrough. And I actually think if we won a majority on Cornwall Council, that would send the strongest message ever to Parliament. I've come to learn that everything can change in a year. Things can stay the same for 10 years. So change is unpredictable. However, I think if we can achieve a Cornish Parliament, we can have a positive, cooperative approach to making decisions here. I think if we don't, I worry that we'd continue with much of the same. And in many ways, we have had deindustrialisation, we have had economic decline. We in the Cornish movement would still be doing everything we can, and there probably would still be a very positive community vibrancy on a local level, and that's great, but sometimes it can feel like you're madly paddling under the water but actually getting nowhere on a national level. So I feel that it needs to be institutionalised. It has to be more than just a Cornwall Council. It has to have more powers to make real changes for ordinary people's lives.
There's a lot that makes Cornwall, Cornwall. Way too much to cover in 1 or 2 videos. But speaking to locals here gave me a glimpse into a culture I'd previously known next to nothing about. A lot of Brits aren't aware that Cornish is even a language, and we're not taught about Cornwall in school. But it's been there for a long time, and its border with England is one of the oldest geopolitical boundaries in the world. It's difficult to find any reliable numbers when it comes to public support for Cornish autonomy. And changing the political landscape enough to get a vote on it seems like a monumental task. But if the last few years have proved anything, it's that definitely doesn't mean it's impossible. So who knows? Maybe one day the United Kingdom will welcome a new, officially recognised country into the mix.